If you live in North America, you've probably seen this image. This is Aunt Jemima, the face of pancake syrups for over a century. Did you know that this advertising trademark came from the minstrel show, where, in the 1870s and 1880s, there was a character performed in blackface and drag known as Old Aunt Jemima? Old Aunt Jemima wore a checkered bandana, was heavy set, and spoke with non standard English. When Nancy Green made her appearance in 1893 at the World Columbian Exposition, the world was introduced to Aunt Jemima as a real black woman. In 2021, PepsiCo removed Aunt Jemima's image from their pancake and syrup products, renaming the product the Pearl Milling Company, which was an ode to the first company to produce the Aunt Jemima product in the 19th century. Not many people realize the connection between Aunt Jemima and the minstrel show. To understand this connection, we have to go back to the 1830s. Blackface minstrelsy is inextricably linked to socioeconomic changes that occurred in the United States in the first decades of the 19th century. As working-class white Americans clung to their position on the social ladder, they began to see African Americans in the North as a threat. And as a result, they sought ways to maintain power, but also to demarcate a boundary between who did and did not belong. One of the ways this was done was through the minstrel show. Thomas Daddy Rice, Dan Emmett, and Edwin Pierce, or E.P. Christie, born in New York, Ohio, and Pennsylvania respectively, are generally recognized as founders of blackface, in addition to Stephen Foster, the major white composer of minstrel music. These men were all Northerners. At least 3 came from old stock American families, were of middle-class background, and most had direct contact through their travels in the lower Mississippi with the music and dance of enslaved African Americans, who they consciously used to develop their routines. As legend has it, Rice, at a loss for a new routine one night, imitated the dance of a black stable hand he had observed earlier in the day, and his song and dance performance of Jump Jim Crow in late 1832 launched a national American obsession with blackface entertainment. Jim Crow and Rice are some of the first publicized performers/characters of blackface who appeared in Toronto's newspapers in the 1860s and 1870s. Foster's Old Folks at Home, also known as Swanee River from 1851, and My Old Kentucky Home, 1853, are still remembered today, as well as Camptown Races, 1850,
Camptown ladies sing this song, doo-dah, doo-dah.
and Oh Susanna, 1848. Where did the names blackface and minstrelsy come from? In 1843, Dan Emmett took his show to New York, where he performed along with 3 others, Billy Whitlock, Frank Brower, and Dick Pelham. The Virginia Minstrels, as they became known, inaugurated an official wave of minstrelsy across North America and Britain. Importantly, the Virginia Minstrels called themselves minstrels because of the great success of a group known as the Tyrolese Minstrel Family, a non-blackface Swiss singing group that had toured America. Although not originally from Virginia, they called themselves the Virginia Minstrels to enhance claims of Southern authenticity, as the first enslaved Africans were brought to the Virginia colony in 1619. The Virginia Minstrels became an overnight sensation. Blackface was also called burnt cork because the black face was produced through combining burnt, pulverized champagne corks and water. Sometimes petroleum jelly or a similar substance was used. In Spike Lee's 2000 film Bamboozled, you have an example of how the burnt cork mask served as a racial marker, announcing that a single actor or an ensemble offered what were selected aspects of supposedly African American culture. This mask was worn by both white and black actors in the 19th century. The only way black actors could perform on the stage prior to the 1890s was in blackface. The genre of blackface minstrelsy is often thought of as an American theatrical form. While historians of American popular culture have explored blackface from almost every angle, in Canada, such remembrances have largely been overlooked. Blackface minstrel troupes first appeared in Toronto in the late 1830s, and by the early 1840s, there is clear evidence that members of Toronto's Black community petitioned City Council annually to prohibit these touring minstrel shows. As Stephen Johnson, my Banting postdoctoral fellow supervisor, said in an interview with Maclean's in 2019, for 4 consecutive years, from 1840 to 1843, Black community petitioned the City Council not to allow the blackface clowns when the American circus put on their show in the city. Quote, "They became more extreme each year," Stephen Johnson said. By the end, they were saying that they were afraid it was inciting physical violence against them, end quote. The document, which can be found on the City of Toronto's website, is labeled, quote, Item 785, Petition of Various People of Color in Toronto, October 14th, 1841, end quote. Despite their efforts, by 1849, blackface minstrelsy continued to draw large audiences at the Royal Lyceum, one of the city's first theater houses, and by 1851, more than half a dozen prominent troupes visited Toronto. American minstrel companies first came to Canada in the 1840s, but the peak years were between the 1860s through 1920s. Touring theatrical productions of Harriet Beecher Stowe's 1852 novel, Uncle Tom's Cabin, was extremely popular in Canada West, present-day southern Ontario. Stowe's novel was intended to be a condemnation of both slavery and the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. However, the book and the subsequent minstrel productions served to affirm widely held beliefs about the supposed inferiority of Black people and the docility of slaves on the southern plantation. Uncle Tom's Cabin became one of the most circulated novels and stage productions of the late 19th century, and it almost single-handedly helped to prove that slavery was justified and right. American fugitive slaves who came north to Canada may have been considered individuals, but the quote-unquote Tom shows, as they were often called, transformed Black bodies into the stock figures they had been in Southern mythology. By the late 19th century, with the Civil War and the horrors of slavery largely gone from the public's imagination, Dixie reemerged as a look back to a past that seemed less complicated as compared to the industrialized centers of the North.
I was in the land of cotton, old times are not forgotten, look away.
Popular minstrel songs from Stephen Foster and newer songs like James Bland's Carry Me Back to Old Virginny, 1914, and Jack Yellen's How's Every Little Thing in Dixie, 1916, helped to cultivate a national nostalgia for the Old South and Dixie, the geographic location that demarcated the boundaries for and symbolized the character of the 11 states that seceded from the Union just prior to the Civil War to form the Confederate States of America. Dixie came to symbolize a place where Southerners fought to maintain their way of life, built on a regional economic system mostly dependent upon cotton and tobacco production and the free labor of African Americans, but also a nostalgic region of a simpler America. As Lee Glazer and Susan Key observe, quote, the post-Reconstruction popular image of the South became a palimpsest of romantic longings as both Northerners and Southerners consumed an image first traced in the antebellum period, end quote. In episode 2, we will cover the post-Reconstruction decades of the 1870s through 1890s, when all-female acts embraced the burnt cork tradition of the minstrel show, putting on blackface and wearing the costumes of minstrelsy, just as their all-male counterparts had done during the heydays of minstrelsy in the 1830s and 40s. At the same time, all Black troupes, some in blackface and some not, composed of many formerly enslaved African Americans, also took to stages in all black revues. This time period spawned a new genre in entertainment. It was called vaudeville.
Some folks like to sigh, some folks do, some folks do. Some folks long to die, but that's not me nor you.